If you are interested in starting your own podcast, we use Buzzsprout because it is simple and easy to use. Buzzsprout can get your show listed on every major platform while giving you the resources for a great podcast website, audio players that can drop into other websites, detailed analytics to see how people are listening to your podcast, and tools to promote your episodes. Podcasting isn't hard when you have the right partners, and that is why over 100,000 podcasters are already subscribed to Buzzsprout to get their message out to the world. Following the link in our episode descriptions lets Buzzsprout know that we sent you. So in return, you will receive a $20 Amazon gift card from Buzzsprout while signing up for a paid plan. Most importantly, every subscription through our link is always appreciated and helps support our show so we can continue delivering the quality content that you guys listen to. That being said, back to the show.
Hello, and welcome to Comic Book Junkies. I'm Andrew.
This is Joe.
And we're coming back at you with the topic episode today. We'll be discussing what writers or artists deserve equal or more credit for a character as opposed to their original creators. So obviously we all know, what stories we love, whether that's new, whether it came out 20 years ago, whether it came out 60 to 70 years ago. But you know who the classic runs are, you know what has really changed a character for you or, in general. And that's not always the original creator, as being a comic fan, especially nowadays, creative teams are changing all the time. So we're going to discuss, who's kind of, left a lasting impact, who we think is like a good fit for putting equal billing for, how much they've contributed to the character. But yeah, how's it going, Joe?
It's going. Not too much to report outside of today's topics, but pretty excited to talk about it, actually, because I came up with more notes than I thought I would, because there's just so many significant takes on all these different characters, But I'll start with what first came to mind to me after asking this question, and I really like what John Romita Sr. did to Spider-Man.
Nice.
Still like Ditko's Spider-Man the most because he created a lot of those characters and provided the frameworks for everything that it is today. But Romita seamlessly took over that title in issue 39.
Agreed.
Dude was on that title for like 5 years too. So when you think of like Kingpin and all those iconic Spider-Man stories, you're actually thinking of Romita Sr. a lot of the time. And I do think he's to thank for why Spider-Man is such a big deal even still. And he's also responsible for that like house style commonly associated with Marvel at that time. So, I mean, I wouldn't even be mad if you gave him credit for taking over Daredevil too, if we're being honest. So more so, I think Spider-Man was a pretty big deal when he took that over. So, I mean, if you told me like that's his baby, I'm cool.
No, I'm with you. I actually had Romita Sr. on my list as well. He is also one of the first things that I thought of during this topic because, like you said, it was almost seamless. Like, I mean, obviously this kicked off with Ditko, and Ditko did a lot of heavy lifting to, get Spider-Man off the ground. Ditko rules. But, to have, that kind of momentum, that kind of popularity in a character, and then to just switch over to another artist, there's a lot that can go wrong, but he picked up and like you could barely tell the difference. I mean, that's not to disrespect either artist. I mean, they're both doing fantastic work, but I think that just tells you how good Romita Sr. was at the time, being able to take over for Ditko and no one really batting an eye as to, the quality dropping or anything like that. It felt like Spider-Man. If anything, it gave it more of the feel that we've come to know and appreciate for Spider-Man. So yeah, I would say he should definitely be put up there, at least on equal billing, like Ditko and all of them, as working on Spider-Man. I got quite a
as
list
long as you
mine.
don't say Dan Slott, we're cool. If you're saying Ditko or Romita, we're good.
Yeah, no, don't worry. I ain't talking about Slott, but I've got quite the list on here. Some of them are more impactful to others than they are myself, but it's still that association that like I'm thinking about when I think of a character or a team. So when I'm thinking about that, a kind of odd one that comes up is Grant Morrison with the Doom Patrol even.
Didn't think about that.
You know what I mean? Like, no one's talking about Arnold Drake and Bob Haney's run on Doom Patrol, the creators of the character. More often than not, when we're seeing an iteration of the Doom Patrol nowadays or whatever, it's largely, riffing off of whatever Morrison had put down during their run. So it's a lasting impact like that makes you that it's almost synonymous at this point. Like I would argue that outside of like heavy comic fans, no one knows that Arnold Drake and Bob Haney created the Doom Patrol. More
You
often than not, you're thinking Morrison.
you could say the same thing about Animal Man too.
Honest. And to a degree, the Teen Titans. Bob Haney and Bruno Premiani created the original iteration of the Titans in Brave and the Bold. I'll be real with you. Never honestly heard of Bruno Premiani prior to this. Didn't realize Bob Haney was also on this. But when you think of Teen Titans, you think of Wolfman and Perez, do you not?
I was just about to say that. When you think Titans, I'm not thinking Grant, I'm thinking Perez.
Yeah, I'm not thinking anybody outside of Wolfman and Perez, to be quite honest with you. They're synonymous at this point. They rebranded the characters. I mean, it's kind of apples and oranges to a degree because obviously they brought in their own characters. It's not the original Silver Age crew. But when you think of Teen Titans, everyone thinks of, the TV show, Teen Titans Go, even the Titans TV show that they poop out onto Max. That rendition of that team is basically the culture of that team. Starfire, Cyborg, Beast Boy, Raven, all them. I mean, they didn't even come around until the 80s. And I mean, that's just synonymous at this point. I mean, I've got plenty of others we can go through, but what's another one off your list?
Yeah, well, real quick before I go next, I do want to
Yeah.
say that although he didn't create the Teen Titans, he did usher in that new team, kind of like Claremont did the new X-Men. So I don't know if that's still
I love
counts,
Oh, it counts. I
Um,
love that you bring that up actually because Claremont and Byrne are on my list. I mean, obviously you can't take away from Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, but we're talking about equal, not necessarily surpassing. And I would argue that their contributions to the X-Men are just as impactful because they brought them back from the edge of being canceled. They were just reprinting old Silver Age stories for a little while there, and then boom, Claremont and Byrne come on the scene. We got the new team. We've got some life pumped into it. We've got the Dark Phoenix saga. We've got all kinds of great stuff. So, yeah, that's how I was looking at it myself. I definitely think that, like Claremont and Byrne, they need to be on equal footing with Lee and Kirby, at least in regard to the X-Men.
yeah, no. And last thing I'll say about Perez too, like everybody growing up on the Teen Titans, kind of like you were mentioning, like I mean, Perez's run on like the Judas contract, like he just brought good storytelling and art to a group of characters that would have otherwise came across as like underage superheroes. And unrelated, but I can't think of a better person in comic book history that could handle large groups of characters like George Perez, maybe other than Claremont and Byrne, but like yourself, they're also on my list. So Claremont kind of bringing in a new crew was phenomenal because there was a long time where that title was kind of uninteresting. It's super convoluted now too, but Claremont seemed to have a really good idea of what the characters needed to be. Him and Byrne in their heyday was something else. Like he gave life to that title by coming up with like, Storm, Colossus, Nightcrawler, Wolverine, like introducing that team versus the old team and the Dark Phoenix saga, the Days of Future Past. I can't thank him enough for what he did and how long he kicked ass on that title. But more so, Byrne, I think Byrne actually made a very good impact on the Fantastic Four. And I think that's like a sleeper pick for me. Like everybody talks about his work on X-Men, but I loved what Byrne did to the Fantastic Four. Like a lot of iconic stuff came out prior to him being on the title, but I liked how creative he was by putting his own twist, adding She-Hulk to the mix prior to how she's kind of perceived today. Also, just great duo when they're together too. So yeah, I mean, comics wouldn't be the same without that team. But one from my list, not to ramble too long, but I got another team. It's Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams. So
Ah, good one.
yeah,
I don't know how I didn't think of them on my list. They
so
definitely deserve.
yes, I think Neil. You can associate Green Lantern with Neil Adams. Like no shade to Gil Kane because it's still his character because the art was incredible even back then, but Neil ushered in the whole Bronze Age of comics when he got on Green Lantern with Denny O'Neil, and the art was always solid, but the storytelling got really nuanced and the iconic covers just kept coming too. So I personally think he did more for Green Lantern than he did Batman, but if you were to take a look at my comic collection, you would clearly see that I'm a huge fan of what he was able to contribute to Batman as well with Denny O'Neil. So can't tell you how many covers I own of that for both Green Lantern and Batman. But kind of going back to Denny O'Neil, maybe not as elite as some of the other names that we've listed so far, but still a legend. In fact, despite Frank Miller's Dark Knight Return run on Batman, which is my favorite Batman story, I actually enjoy the overall tone of Denny O'Neil's Batman much better. I think he contributed more to the character, and in that time, it was just such a great time to be a Batman fan, and loved every time him and Neil paired up, whether it was Green Lantern or Batman.
Nice. I do like how you mentioned one of my picks, Frank Miller, too. Not to brush yours aside, but I'm just thinking Frank Miller all of a sudden. What about him with Daredevil? Because I mean, that's Stan Lee and Bill Everett's creation there, but when it comes to classic runs or iconic moments, I mean, who do you generally associate those with? So, I mean, that was also kind of early Miller. So, it was a good time for him, especially. And it was a good time for the character of Daredevil, who, back then, I don't believe had too many, classic storylines or runs at that point. I mean, it was just solid, but nothing like remarkable, I would venture to say, until he got around, you start seeing more iconic covers, more iconic characters being introduced and stuff like that, which I found very cool. And, just the way that it kind of had a bit more. Well, I mean, he definitely made Batman darker in a sense, but almost the same thing for Daredevil, which, I mean, he's pretty much up there now with who you associate with the name. But then also, this one's kind of more offbeat a little bit. But like, what about the Punisher? What about Garth Ennis? Definitely, who's generally considered the writer of like the definitive Punisher run from like Punisher Max and all of that. I mean, this was a Romita Sr. and Jerry Conway creation as well. So, I mean, there's no slouches involved with the character. But, ever since, his creation, and then other than like that 2001 Punisher Max run, what great storytelling has there really been for Frank Castle? I mean, especially with what they're doing to my boy nowadays. They're just changing the logo. They're sending him to hell or going somewhere else. I mean, there's been a lot of dumb Punisher stories, but I feel like they're sweeping my guy under the rug. But who didn't do that was Garth Ennis. And there's a lot of different ways we can go with this. I've got like a whole little list here. Actually, let me do one more for you. Quick one. Because this one's tough because I think that the creators are like the goats of the character, like as is, and they're sweet. RIP to the guys, or at least one of the guys. But Alan Moore
Swampy?
on Swamp Thing.
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah,
thought you were going to say.
for sure. I mean, Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson, they did great work, obviously. There's nothing wrong with what they did. But when we talk the story of Swamp Thing, his kind of rebirth with that second volume with Alan Moore writing it has really done a lot to like the lasting legacy of the character. It's done a lot to how people see the character and even just like the origin of the character and how the character acts on his own now. So, yeah, I mean, he's also contributed John Constantine, and I still say Constantine, but apparently the proper way is Constantine, but it feels wrong to say that. But, a lot of, bigger concepts that were applied to Swamp Thing during that time period. Even if Alan Moore hates most superhero stuff, I mean, that he still did like one of the best Swamp Thing runs you can read. So, yeah, I mean, they're on my list. I really only have like a couple more on my list because I'm just rolling through them so quick. You want to hit me with another one of yours?
Yeah, so I don't have any more, but I do want to
Oh,
talk a little bit more about Frank Miller and a little bit more about Alan Moore.
nice.
Like you said, I know Stan Lee and Bill Everett created Daredevil, and I don't want to take anything away from them because they deserve their respect because it's still their character. But
Equal footing.
yeah, if you're gonna talk Daredevil with somebody, the first thing to come to mind is Frank Miller. From his time doing the character to the first time on the title to the creation of Elektra, I mean, Frank Miller added a lot of nuance to the story. I think that wasn't there, and the visuals of the character too were pretty good at that time, like some really cool covers. So some may give him credit for Batman as well. Like I referenced the Dark Knight Returns being my personal favorite, but I'm not going to take it there because he also, I think, kind of damaged Batman as well. Like what I mean by that is that it was a great take, but the character has been like dark, gloomy, like a bunch of weird undertones since. And I feel like the the characters had a hard time recovering from that, but it totally makes sense for Daredevil. So I do got to give him his dues when it comes to Daredevil. And then Swamp Thing, Alan Moore's bread and butter is taking characters that already exist and creating like the best comic book stories of all time with those characters. Like he created Watchmen from Charlton characters, which is arguably the best comic story of all time. But since we're just talking about the characters that already exist, he also brought new life to like Miracle Man and even Superman as well. I'll leave Soups out of it for now, but when you think of Swamp Thing, you think of Alan Moore before you think Bernie Wrightson. And even though they did an incredible job of introducing the character and they had a really good run too, to take an already cool character and make it even realer is an incredible talent. And Alan Moore was so good at this that he even made the comic book medium more popular in general. So I did also want to give him credit though for his run on Miracle Man, because that was more of like a UK thing. And Alan Moore being from the UK, it just made a lot of sense to kind of put his spin on the character. But I'm happy he did because it brought up a lot of attention to like American readers. And I associate the character with Alan Moore more than I do Michelangelo.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you said. I mean, you can't talk about the characters without talking about those runs at this point. But you said you don't have any more. I'll be real with you. I've got two left. So we'll go with one that's more geared towards you first. How about Jeff Johns on Green Lantern?
Interesting.
Think about how much he's done for the character with, all of the major storylines. Think about the storylines that were large prior to Johns. He seemed to really take an affinity for it. He really fleshed out the Lantern tribes, the core, the different color tribes, and didn't he spearhead Blackest Night, probably Brightest Day?
He did.
Exactly.
Right.
So, I mean, when you think of the Sinestro Corps War, all of that.
I guess just not enough time has settled for me to like instantly think that way. But I mean, the evidence is there. I
That's
mean,
what
you're
I'm
absolutely
saying.
right. Like the best stories do come from Jeff Johns.
Yeah, just because they've been within the past 20, 30 years, that doesn't change the fact that they've been the best ones, period. So, I mean, that was a little food for thought there. That was that was honestly third on my list. I don't know how it popped up so fast. But that one that's geared more towards me is Mark Waid on Flash.
Okay.
So he changed the game. I mean, if you want to think about it, he came on in volume 2, issue 62. From that point on, that's when Wally was the Flash, which, if you're a Justice League animated series enjoyer, as we are, then you love Wally as the Flash. 2, well, I guess there wasn't even a 1, but 2, he introduced the Speed Force. That wasn't a thing until Mark Waid. And so that was actually pretty late in the game. That was in the 90s. So he introduced the Speed Force, which, as we all know, is pivotal to the character, not just Wally, but Barry, Bart, Jay Garrick, everyone now. So there is no speedsters without the Speed Force nowadays. Third, he made Wally the fastest Flash, which I've always thought was a cool distinction, which he did to get out of Jay Garrick and Barry Allen's shadow. Because, if you got 3 guys that all do the same thing and they're all about equal, or one of the newer guys isn't really as fast or strong, then like kind of what's the point? So, he kind of buffed up Wally, and I've always liked that iteration on it, that Wally's been if not one of the quickest. And then third, fourth, either way, he introduced Bart Allen, which to some people who care, they may not care about Impulse, because now we're getting into like our fourth like Flash. But it's like Barry's like what? Like grandson, great grandson, something like that. His grandson. But either way, he's come back and he's been Impulse. He was even the Flash for a short time. And I think he even introduced Max Mercury. So he really flashed out the Flash family, which I don't think that the Flash
What a
needs to
tongue
have a whole.
twister.
I know, right? Say that 10 times fast. Which, I mean, I guess it's a little controversial because I don't think that the Flash needs a family of superheroes, much like Batman truly doesn't either. But, they're here, so we'll deal with it. But, there's Jesse Quick and whoever the hell else, and Max Mercury now, Bart and fucking Jimmy. And I'm just kidding. There's no Jimmy. But, either way, I still like the fact that, DC's strong point has always been legacy characters. And for one writer to be able to expand the supporting characters in an interesting way, kind of all at once, create a whole Speed Force background for all of these characters, and, assert like a lesser Flash prior to being one of the coolest and most well known, I think is definitely deserving because outside of like the Silver Age and everything like that, that really gave the character all of like his villains and whatnot. I mean, later on, Jeff Johns' runs, like with Flash Rebirth and stuff like that. Who else do you really think of when you think of Flash stories? I think of Johns, Wade, and then the Silver Age. So
Yeah,
yeah,
you can't leave Johns out of that conversation either. He
no,
really
because he
cared
did.
about Shazam, Flash, and the Green Lantern.
Don't get me started on Shazam though, because I don't know how much he cares about Shazam. He
He makes an
bastardized that last run.
effort, but it's not what you think it would be.
Yeah, no, he's actually terrible with the flat or the with Shazam. So that like I never speak ill against Jeff Johns and in Johns we trust, but not with Shazam. Ever since 2011, that dude just fucking drove a stake right through the heart of Shazam and thus through me, and that makes me mad. Dude, we don't need the extended Shazamily or whatever the hell they want to call him now, bro. How about you just give us the main three, the Talking Tiger and Uncle Dudley, and then you know what? Let's not reboot it in the post New 52 where we still got all those chuckleheads, and then we got why they make Freddy blonde. That pisses me off beyond all belief, and it has no bearing on the character, but Captain Marvel Jr. is not a long blonde haired boy. That makes no sense. Shit pisses me
Preach.
off. That's not what Elvis intended. Elvis modeled himself after Captain Marvel Jr., and I didn't see Elvis with Fabio locks running around. So, and okay, I'm not airing out all of my grievances because that's not what we're talking about today. But just let it be known, I don't care about 2011 Shazam and onward, except our boy Mark Waid, which we just referenced. He's trying to right the ship. So I trust that.
Yes.
For
So
those
far,
not
so good.
familiar, yeah, I mean, let's not say it's like knocking my socks off, but we're course correcting. Freddy magically has black hair again, and they're calling my guy the captain. They're not calling him Shazam. This is all in the right direction. I love it. And he was hanging out with dinosaurs from space. That's exactly like a thought that I had for a comic book, and then I was reading it like a month later. So Mark Waid gets it, and that's why he got the Flash, and that's why he should be on equal footing to the Flash creators. Whether you want to talk Golden Age, Silver Age, whatever, Mark Waid's in the Flash pantheon.
Shout out Mark Waid for being the only one getting it done, like for modern stuff too. I don't know what it is, but it seems like he's the only one that understands anything. I mean, him and Williamson, I like both of them, but outside of that, you can trash all that other crap.
Whoa, bold takes on CBJ. Not
Well, I
really though,
mean,
not
what
for us.
everything I'm reading, it's either Williamson or Mark Waid.
Yeah, same here. It's mostly Mark Waid, which is funny. This has become the Mark Waid appreciation podcast, apparently. But I mean, for real, he's one of the old heads at this point, and he's the only one who gets it.
Yeah, I don't know why, but these comic creators don't live very long.
Because they're hunched over in the dark with no health insurance.
I'll take anything Mark Waid gives us at this point. But I guess I do have a question for you after doing this exercise. Out of all the names that we just listed, as well as the people you listed as well, which creator do you think did the best job of making the character their own?
Wolfman and Perez.
Yeah.
I would have to say so.
Oh,
I think all of them, well, it's like them or Claremont Byrne even more just because of how much he changed. But Wolfman and Perez rebooted and then skyrocketed like up the charts the Teen Titans, who were just a band of sidekicks, which no one gave a damn about sidekicks. But they even managed to make Dick Grayson Nightwing, the original Robin. They were even able to make a lasting impact on one of the OG characters that's stuck through to this point today and has been well received. And I just think in terms of, propelling DC through any hardships and, making characters popular, I mean, they made one of my favorite all-time characters, Deathstroke the Terminator. I just think that they really did make it theirs. I mean, the team is, changed in who's been a member with during their run, but at the same time, like, it's synonymous at this point. I don't think no one thinks of any other iteration of the Teen Titans. I mean, unless you're like a generation prior to us and you're thinking about like the Cassie Sandsmark, Tim Drake, and all of them. iteration from like the early whatevers. Who cares? But you know what I mean? Just the Judas contract, just kind of the cultural legacy that the Teen Titans like have now. I don't think anybody can replicate what they've done. I don't think it's gonna happen again. And they reinvented the wheel for a superhero team of teenagers. And I would argue that while there's interesting runs since, none of them even come close to scraping what they were able to accomplish. That being said, what's yours? Because you seem mighty surprised.
I was a little surprised, but shout out Perez on Wonder Woman too. I'm just thinking of that now. Like that's his
Shout out
character.
Perez, period.
Yeah. But when taking the notes, the first person to come to mind was Ramita. However, after finishing my notes, I feel no one took over a character better than Alan Moore did Swamp Thing. You
I
can
agree.
convince me that Chris Claremont's run on X-Men is the answer, because it had to have been like the best-selling book of all time after he took it over. But to take a character like Swamp Thing and create a story that transcends like comic books is a beast of its own. I personally really enjoy Claremont's like Dark Phoenix saga. Like that's one of my favorite comics of all time, but he basically created new characters to help that title, and he had a whole team of characters to support his mission or goal. But Alan Moore just focused on a one swamp creature, and made it
Yeah,
really interesting and cool, even though it was already interesting and cool. So
true.
gotta give it to
I
more
mean,
Swamp Thing.
yeah, I can't disagree with that. When I was kind of, first thing that popped into my head when you asked me that question, because I wasn't prepared for that, Moore did come across with how you worded it, because I agree. I mean, he completely pretty much made it his own, basically redefined the character moving forward. So I think, yeah, that was a really good choice.
But that's all I
But I
got.
mean, unless we have any other, that's all I got.
No, but
All
what do you want
right.
to do for our listeners next episode? Do you want to watch that documentary?
I'll have enough time to digest the documentary now that we got some time in between. I ain't binging 3 hours in a night, brother. But
That's what I asked
I
my
tell you
man.
what,
He
that
said
sounds like a
no,
plan.
but now we got at
I says,
least
are
a
you
week or
serious?
two. All right, we have
Yeah,
a
we can
topic
do
for
that
you
one.
next time. We're gonna review the new
Perfect.
DC documentary on HBO.
Yeah. And in the meantime, if you want to keep up with us, we're at CBJ Pod on Instagram, CBJ Podcast on Facebook, Comic Book Junkies on YouTube as well. We're not video folks yet, still determining that, but we do have the whole archive there. So if you want to ever check out or show a friend, we are on YouTube. We're anywhere you listen to podcasts. Obviously, if you're listening to this, you already know that. But for those who don't, you can find us anywhere. And, make sure to tell a friend. Word of mouth's probably the best way. So if you're enjoying it, maybe one of your comic enjoying friends will as well. Otherwise, I mean, if you can, give us a 5-star review or a 5-star rating, a review on anywhere that accepts them. It helps the algorithm. I'm not going to plead and beg, but, it does help us or any other podcast you like kind of get pushed into the algorithm, and therefore we find more friends. But that being said, you know what we're doing next time, and we will catch you then.
All right, guys, appreciate you listening.
Later.